Okay, the next portion that we want to review is Dreamweaver. It seems like a really short list, but it's actually a little bit deceiving in that a lot of the things that we discussed with Dreamweaver actually show up on the web design or concepts portion of the list or the review sheet, which is actually quite longer. So the first thing we should be familiar with are different file types we might generate out of Dreamweaver. If we go to the class discussions tab again, we should be able to find this handout called Getting Started with Dreamweaver. It is, like I said, right under class discussions. After we finish through the Flash components, we should be able to see this Dreamweaver review and CSS introduction handout. We're going to want to look at both this one as well as, while you're here, you might as well open it, the next link, examples of external, internal, and inline CSS. But on this handout, this one, the Getting Started with Dreamweaver handout, we see those different file types. They are right here in the middle. Our file extensions of the HTML, a CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheet, and the DWT, or our template file. So there's also a little bit of a summary here of what cascading style sheets are. Essentially, they're just saved instructions that help us with formatting our website, so we don't need to format everything individually. CSS can be either inline being the one that is probably the least efficient, but inline CSS is where in a particular tag I add a style component. So here's the example looking at that website that I'd linked you to under class discussions, where within the paragraph tag I add my my CSS right there, and it just applies to this particular paragraph tag. The next type of CSS is called internal. It's just a little bit more sophisticated, but what happens is in the head section I have my CSS right here in the middle of my head section. I've got my style tags, and this would apply to the entire page. So instead of just one tag, internal CSS applies to an entire page. Every time I use the HR tag, every time I use the P tag, these styles are going to apply. The most sophisticated one is the external style sheet. The external style sheet is when instead of having this in the head section, I actually just, all my head section contains is a link or a reference to where all my CSS is. And then it's this one sheet, it got downloaded one time, and I can continue to use that throughout my entire website. So this goes hand in hand with this basic framework, which I typed up in advance for us so we could see it quickly, which is the open HTML, open head, close body, close HTML. So the inline CSS, those type that were the least sophisticated, would go in between this body section to apply to each particular tag. The internal CSS would show up in between the head section and apply to the page, just the whole page, instead of just one tag. An external CSS would actually have a separate file, but the external CSS file would be referenced in this head section. Okay, let's go ahead and flip back and see what else we needed to know about Dreamweaver. So we need to know what keywords are. Keywords are 6 to 8 words that I type into a search engine. Excuse me, just erase all that. 6 to 8 words that I put into my website so that when a search engine spider or bot is crawling my site to index the page, it would be able to read those keywords and see what I think that somebody would be typing into a search engine to find my page. Alternative text is what we use for people with, it's an accessibility feature. People with screen readers can hear the alternative text since they can't see the picture itself. Alternative text can also be used on other components like tables or diagrams. We already talked about CSS. Forms. So forms are interesting because they reverse the flow of information. Instead of data going from the web server to the user, the data is actually flowing from the user to us. You might want to be familiar with some of the basic form fields like the radio button, checkbox, list or menu, and, you know, the button itself for, you know, like a submit button. Finally, FTP, which stands for File Transfer Protocol. FTP is how we upload files from our machine to the server, and we can also download to the server from the server back down to our machine. That actually reminded me that I do actually have another handout on this. I had forgotten about this earlier. If you go to the Web Background tab, or Outline Web Background, the first handout, I explain, I don't know if it's, wow, it seems like it's been forever since we looked at this, but I explain the FTP process, where we upload files to the server and, you know, download files from the server. So for this section for Dreamweaver, we want to look at maybe this sheet if we need some refresher on FTP. We want to look at the getting started with Dreamweaver to get those file extensions, proper naming, find out about cascading style sheets, and we want to look at this website for the examples of external, internal, and inline CSS. I actually, since we're talking about this anyway, and I have the page pulled up, this is an example. It's a really interesting website. It's an example of it's an example of inline CSS, and I don't know how well you can see all that, but you can see how so much of this page is dedicated to formatting, because they're adding that CSS in every single tag. It's just kind of excessive, and seeing something like this, I think, makes it very clear as to why the external is so much more efficient. Okay, I think that's everything in the Dreamweaver section. So, yep, we'll go ahead and end there.